Okay, so I think it's a good moment now to start. There may be still some people who can come in at a later point. Before I start with introductions, I'd like to share a couple of information points here. So the webinar will be recorded. So for any colleague who later wants to have a look at it, it will become available on ShareFile, and we share the link with everyone within IDH. We are organizing this webinar as it's the first time, so please excuse us in case it's not perfect yet. But it's really an offer for IDH staff to understand better what we are up to with FarmFit, and a lot of people ask actually if we could do this type of crash course. And in order to really keep it in a webinar style, we like to ask you to write any questions that you may have in the chat function. So we can then react to your questions directly. You can ask questions on the slides themselves, because we think that's just more useful in this context. Yes, so if you don't have any questions right now, then I suggest we just start. Please type the questions in the chat function. So my name is Heidi. I'm a program officer with FarmFit Intelligence, and I'm doing this webinar together with my colleague Kaf. And I think Kaf would be great if you can give a quick introduction from your side before we start.
Yep, so my name is Kaf, Kafwi, short for Kafwi. I'm based in the Utrecht office. I work as a data analyst, but I split my time 50% with the FarmFit Intelligence Center and 50% on FarmFit business support. And on the business support side, I'm executing SDM studies.
Exactly. So, and probably there may already be some confusion. Okay, but what are all these different elements of FarmFit? So let's just kick it off. So, well, yeah. So basically, there are three elements about FarmFit. There's the FarmFit business support, there's the FarmFit intelligence, and there's FarmFit funds. In this webinar, we're only going to focus on the first two. And you will learn a little bit more about what are these actually made of, and what's the difference, and how you will work together with us. But before that, I think we wanted to provide you a bit more content about what we do with FarmFit. So FarmFit business support and FarmFit intelligence, we're working actually on what we call so-called service delivery models. And these are innovative smallholder business models. Our donor reach is mostly on sub-Saharan Africa, but we also do, in our capacity, offer analyses outside Africa. We focus, in contrast to most other IDH programs, we focus for 70% of our work is on staple crops. So that's beans, pulses, rice, cassava, and only 30% is on cash crops. This program is financed by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the UK Department for International Development, short DFID. We have a total budget of $30 million over a period of 5 years. We were signed in January, so we go beyond the IDH funding cycle. So SDM studies can also, so we, like I said, we also do SDM studies outside Africa, but they cannot be funded via FarmFit. But this is then something that needs to be picked up from IDH programs. Currently, we have a global team of 26 people, so that's quite a big team. While some of those also work part-time with other programs, like, for example, a learning innovation team or other programs. So we're going to focus a lot of these things in more detail. And I'd like to give you, first of all, a little bit more context about why we actually started to work on this. So FarmFit is actually a scale up from this innovative approach that was developed by Learning Innovation. So since 2015, the Learning Innovation team developed an approach that was called service delivery model. And we're going to talk a lot more about what this actually means in a moment. So the Learning Innovation team had worked on 40 companies in over 13 countries. And it was a tool to basically assess as IDH whether the investments we do are actually efficient and effective. In those years, we have done a lot of studies in all different types of countries. So you can see at the start, we started off with 3 cases. These were mostly in coffee and cocoa. In 2016, we scaled this up by further standardizing our approach and the methodology. In 2017, we had more than 10 studies, and we worked also with several partners for the second time. And then 2018, this whole project gained traction, and the Gates Foundation and DFID started discussions to set up FarmFit. So we're now going to focus on really what is this SDM approach actually about, and I'm going to hand over to Kaf.
Okay, thank you, Heidi. So please, can you go to the next slide? Great. So when we talk about SDMs, we talk what we mean. We're talking about ecosystems or supplies chain structures which provide services to farmers. So traditionally, these services might have encompassed training, inputs, and finance, but we also see a variety of different services. We see insurance, we see market access, we see diversification, rejuvenation. So all of these services which are provided to farmers, whether it's to improve their performance and the profitability of the farmers, these are what we call service delivery models. Thank you. So how we look at it is we try to distinguish, okay, so what are our service providers and what are they delivering to the farmers, and what is this potential impact to the farmers? But of course, this is all taking part, or it's happening within an enabling environment. So one of the key things which we try to understand is what also is the impact of the enabling environment on this service delivery model. And I'm going to go into this in a lot more detail going forward and what exactly we do, but I would like to spend a little time just talking about why we use this term service delivery model, because this is not it's not something which has been developed by IDH delivering services to farmers, but the terminology and the approach is something which has been developed by IDH. So the idea behind, or why the SDM approach emerged, is one was to develop a common way of understanding and analyzing service delivery. So on the first hand, it was a matter of language. So these service delivery models, as we call them, there's various other names which exist within the sector. And the challenge when there's various names for the same concept is that the comparability of these models then becomes a challenge. So from IDH's perspective, the idea is if we can start to ground a common language, from there we can also build a common methodology of analyzing service delivery. So this takes us more into the methodology per se. And the methodology is fundamentally, it's built around a data-driven and systematic approach to generating insights. So during the methodology, we have a standard case report and we have standard indicators, and using these as anchors, we try to ensure that each time we analyze one of these models, we're taking a similar approach. And by taking a similar approach, that allows us to draw insights across different service delivery models. What works in what location, how things are designed in some locations for some crops. And this then helps us understand, okay, so how do we make service delivery models more efficient in terms of cost efficiency, so having the biggest impact for the lowest spending, and ultimately how to make them more sustainable. Because one of the challenges which we see in the sector is certain programs which are delivering services to farmers, they might have a lot of impact, but they're just losing money at such a rate that one day the donor funding dries up, and then it closes up, and that's what we want to avoid. We want to avoid these programs disappearing. We want them to be able to stand on their own 2 feet. So the approach we're taking is very much focusing on drawing out these insights. And to add to that, is why we think it's been a very useful tool at IDH, is we've effectively been using it as a due diligence step. So rather than investing in in technical assistance projects with a lower amount of certainty or understanding over the projects, the SDM approach really seeks to operate as a due diligence step, whereby we try to generate what is happening in the service delivery model, how sustainable it is, how effective is it, how efficient is it, and through that it better allows us to tailor the services and the assistance that we're willing to offer. So the next slide, which we're just going to look at, is the basic starting point for a service delivery model. So how we often look at it is, so sometimes you have a donor funded service delivery model, sometimes it might be funded by the company itself, but we begin with this case operator. So I'm just going to stop there because I can see the first question. So are SDMs mainly meant for donor-funded projects or programs? Not necessarily. So I would say that you have a wide range of what we call SDM operators, and what you can see in the slide called case operators. And yeah, okay, I just see the next comment. Oh, sorry. So SDM operators and case operators. And these can, in some cases, these can be donor-funded projects. So we've had some cases where the operator might be a 1-acre fund, it might be Roots Capital, it might be someone whose objective is really focusing on the livelihoods of farmers, and it's mainly donor-funded. But also we have different archetypes. So the actual majority of SDMs which we've looked at are operated by sourcing companies. So these can be global sourcing companies like Barry Callebaut and Ecom, or they can be local sourcing companies, which we're seeing more and more in our work in sub-Saharan Africa. And for these operators, the goal is often different. They offer the services because they want to secure supply from farmers in greater amounts. And then beyond there, we also have other case operators who are offering these services as purely as a business model. So we have one innovative approach which I've seen is DigiFarm, which is operated by Safaricom in Kenya. Safaricom being a mobile network operator, and DigiFarm is a platform which was developed by Safaricom, which allows farmers through their mobile phones, through text message service, to access inputs, to access credit, to access learning information, insurance. And the way DigiFarm earns its money, a lot of its money, it comes from the fees which it gets from the partners who offer these services, and also from any mobile money transactions. So you have organizations like DigiFarm, and there's various others who actually, they're not seeking to source any produce from farmers, but rather they are selling these services to farmers at a cost. So referring back to this diagram, so we have the case operator, and then we have the farmer. And in this example here is going to be most it's going to correspond most with a sourcing company. So often your relationship could be more of a I guess more of a transactional relationship. So your case operator is paying for the product from the farmers, and they're sourcing the product. So what has emerged in a lot of service delivery models is they've begun with offering training. So then it develops. So your case operators now training the farmers. The farmers may or may not be paying for this training, and the hope of the case operator is this has more productive farmers which increases the level of sourcing. But then in many service delivery models, particularly if you look at the trajectory of a single service delivery model, you often see that they start to add more services. So one of the insights we've seen is that there's a tendency for service delivery models to become more holistic. So then often beyond training, you would see inputs added. So there we open up with inputs on the left. And then again, for a lot of service delivery model operators, just having training and inputs is deemed as not sufficient. You actually had to provide funding to the farmers. So then you also see, sometimes you see SDM operators providing funding themselves, and sometimes you see them in strategic partnerships with financial service providers. So this slide here is a basic overview of what a SDM looks like in practice. But this is quite a simple model. We see models with differing levels of complexity. You might have models with 10 different service providers. You might have models with just a single service provider. All these different types of models we call service delivery models, and the approach works across all of them. So the approach is while it's standardized, it's also very flexible. Okay, so when do we perform an SDM analysis? So there's 3 general stages which we might perform an SDM analysis. One is a pre-SDM, or often we call it a design or a pilot SDM. So in this instance, we might speak to a partner, and the partner comes to us and they say, we want to source more from smallholder farmers. So for example, I'm doing a case in Tanzania where they've just started sourcing from smallholder farmers, having mainly sourced from traders and commercial farmers. So in this case, the SDM analysis, it relies a lot on assumptions, and also the way that we look at it is we're helping the company design the SDM. So we're giving them advice on different aspects, what services to offer to whom, perhaps should they segment their farmers in the sense that some farmers get some services and some farmers get other services. These are different things we look at the pre-SDM level. Next, we have at pre-investment. So this might be a SDM which has been running for several years, and they're looking to invest in a TA project, and we want to use the SDM analysis to guide how best to improve or innovate the model, which will be the most cost efficient. And then the last timing of when we perform an SDM analysis is at post-investment. And at post-investment, this is very much an evaluation, to evaluate what has been the effect of the investment at both the service provider and the farmer. Has it been profitable for the service provider? Has it had the desired impact at the farm level? So within the SDMs that we have done, we have quite a broad spread at these different levels. We have several which are done at the pre-SDM level, several at the pre-investment level and several at the post-investment level.
Okay. Let's continue if there's no more questions. Yeah.
Okay, so the learning framework. So this is what guides our analysis, and this will be familiar to what I've said over the course of the last slides. So we identified key learning questions to help us understand the conditions for the sustainability of the business model. The questions we're ultimately asking is we're asking under which conditions can service delivery models be efficient, cost effective, and create a sustainable return on investment at scale. So in this sense, when we're looking at the enabling environment is something which we can't change, and the SDM itself can't change the enabling environment, but it can be designed in a way where it adapts to the enabling environment. But specifically, what we end up looking at is we look at, okay, how cost efficient is this SDM? So some of the metrics which we look at is, what is the cost per farmer, or the net cost per farmer? What is the cost per metric ton sourced if it's a service delivery model where they are sourcing from the farmers? Then we look at the farm level. What's happening to the productivity of the farmer? Does this translate into an increase in profitability for the farmer? And what improvement are we seeing at the farm level for every dollar of money invested at the SDM level? And then thirdly, we're looking at sustainability. So we're looking at, how does this SDM fund itself, and what is the viability for it to fund itself in the future? So one thing to note here is often service delivery models, or the vast majority of service delivery models, are unprofitable, and in some cases that's perhaps not that big an issue. So say you're a sourcing company and you're sourcing coffee, the services itself, just looking at the delivery of services, you're delivering services at a cost. You might receive payments back for them, but those payments aren't sufficient to cover the cost of service delivery. But that might not necessarily show that it's unsustainable if you're seeing a benefit in terms of the amount of coffee which you're sourcing. So often what we also look at is, we're looking at how much more coffee or of the product needs to be sourced from each farmer in order to cover the cost of the service delivery model. Is there anything you'd like to add there, Heidi?
No, I think that's about it. I think it's good to focus also on the other elements that we are looking at.
Yeah. So So there's. Sorry, what was that?
No, I didn't say anything. Should I move to the next slide?
Yes, please. So they were the building blocks of the SDM, but the SDM method, or the SDM approach, has been evolving over time. So we've also been increasingly embedding 3 particular lenses into our analysis. So the first lens that we're bringing in, or that we've brought in, and we could definitely do a lot more work on it, and Wendy has been doing quite a lot of good work out of Kenya, is gender empowerment. So we want to understand, what is the impact of the service delivery model on gender relations. And you see in some service delivery models, they have gender tailored services, whereas others don't. And we're developing or one of our targets actually is to focus more on service delivery models which are more gender intentional and transformational. Also, we look at from the angle of climate resilience. So what is the yeah, how much more resilient are farmers to environmental impact. And then we are looking at food security and nutrition. So the challenges which this involves, and I'll talk about this a bit more later, is firstly is gathering data, and one thing which many participants to this call probably will recognize is data from SDM operators is generally quite bad. So we've been working a lot with SDM operators, but also internally in improving our data collection so we can really be able to analyze these aspects effectively. Okay.
Yeah, and so maybe I can add here. So basically what we're looking at specific indicators for these different lenses that we are including into our analyses. And based on the data that we then gather, we try to talk to the companies about best practices that can inspire the service design and an innovative approach. And ultimately, we come out of an analysis with clear recommendations on how you can actually test this in an intervention as part of a TA project, which we will focus on a bit more later. So if we move to the next slide.
Yep. Okay, so the key elements of an SDM. So what we deliver to clients from a study is the key thing we deliver is a report, and this report has two aspects to it, or two main parts to it. It has what we call the descriptive side of the report, or the descriptive case report, and they are the slides on the left hand side. So, and then it has an analytical part of the report, which are on the right hand side. In the descriptive part of the report is very much understanding what is the structure of the SDM. Who are the key stakeholders? What are their objectives? What is the context within which this SDM is operating? Then we look at which services are provided, by whom, and by how. Are these services provided to everyone equally? Are packages given? What are the delivery mechanisms? Are lead farmers used? Are there farmer groups used? And then who is the beneficiary and who is targeted? So what's the sequencing of these services? So that firstly, in a typical case, the first thing that we're doing is we're seeking to understand the key elements of the SDM. And once we understand these elements of the SDM, this then acts as a launch pad into the analytical part of the report. And the analytical part of the report is split generally into three parts. So firstly, we look at the farm level. So what is the adoption and impact at the farm level? So we look at the profitability and productivity. We look at resilience and sensitivity. Also, we look at cash flow volatility at the farm level. Then we look at the SDM level. So how is the SDM financed? How much benefit does it get on its commercial side? What are its funding sources? How much revenues does it generate from the services that it's providing? And then one of the key things we do is we also provide sensitivity analysis to understand how can this model be commercially viable. So as I mentioned before, we might look at the commercial break even. By the commercial break even, what I mean is how much more would this SDM need to source to cover its own costs? Okay, so jumping into the business case for the farmer. So typically the approach that we take is we look at what we call a baseline farmer, and the baseline farmer we define as a farmer who is not in receipt of the services within the service delivery model, and they act as our control when we want to understand what is the impact of the SDM. So we'll always have a baseline farmer, and that's for comparative purposes, and then we have SDM farmers. And the SDM farmers, these might be segregated into, or they might be segmented into different groups. So one way you might do it is you might have what we've seen in some cases is you have a farmer graduation model. So you might have some farmers which are receiving, or every farmer starts off at a level of receiving maybe 3 services. So they're receiving inputs, training, and credit. And then after meeting certain criteria, some of these farmers might be offered additional services. And in that case, what we might look at is we might say, okay, we have the farmers who are in the traditional SDM basic, and then we have farmers which are in SDM plus. So using these 3 different segments, what we then look at is we look at, okay, so what are their main cost drivers? What are their main revenue drivers? How do the different services impact their costs and impact their revenues? And then this brings us to understand what is the economic sustainability at the farm level. So the graphs which you can see in the slide, so you can see we have the baseline on the left, then segment 1 and segment 2. You can see that the net income, which is the blue line, is much higher than the baseline, and that is largely driven by the addition of or the increase of the revenue 1 source. So here you could perhaps guess that there's been a big increase in productivity on whatever is revenue 1. Okay, next slide, please. Then we look at the business case for the company. So we look at firstly, we look at the service profitability. So in the graph to the bottom left, this is comparing, so what are the revenues from the services versus what are the key expenses for the services. And here is a good example of what a typical service delivery model might look like. Generally, you would see that the expenses are higher than the revenues, and there is a net loss. So that obviously can look concerning, but then we often add the commercial viability. So we don't have a graph in this slide deck, but what we might do is we might say, okay, so your SDM is losing this much, but what is the margin that you are making on your commercial activities? So perhaps in 2022, they're losing $467,000 to their SDM, but due to the increase in sourcing from this service delivery model, they're actually making a profit. So that's a key area of comparison that we make. And then we also look at more metrics around efficiency. So on the right-hand side, you can see, so the number of farmers in the SDM. So that's the blue bars, which are growing over time, with the left-hand side axis. Then you look at what's happening to your net cost per farmer, which is fairly steady in this example. But then you can also see underneath we have the cost per metric ton sourced. So this would imply that the level of sourcing is increasing quite significantly. So this gives us a better understanding of the impact of the SDM at the commercial level. Anything to add, Heidi, or any questions on the line?
No, nothing to add from my side. Only thing, I think these 2 business cases are really the starting point of an analysis. So basically, when you do an analysis, this is kind of where you want to get relatively quickly. just by recording the data that you receive from the company. And it becomes really interesting when you start looking into, okay, so how would it look like if I change the service that I offer? How would it look like if adaptation rates may change due to increased quality training? And then you start actually with the modeling and better understanding how potential interventions could actually have an impact on the profit and loss calculations of a service delivery model.
Yeah.
So this is then really where the SDM methodology becomes a strategic advice piece also for the companies and partners that we work with as IDH.
Yeah.
Heidi, can I ask a question? Before you get into the deeper additional services, just on the basis on where you are now, I'm just curious to know what the experience is. It looks as sometimes, well, consultants are known to kind of produce the knowledge that the clients already know. And I'm just curious here, is this to the level of understanding the profit and loss or the commercial viability, service profitability? Is this something that companies in general actually did never do? They just started an SDM without actually knowing where they were getting in? Or is it in general that they are already aware that they are paying for something that they get back on the commercial side? Or how does it, I mean, how far doing this analysis, it looks very interesting, right? But are they already doing this or not? I've seen different examples in my own work, but how is, in general, to all your cases, to the point that you got now, is this new for them or knowledge that they already know?
So perhaps I'll start and Heidi jump in anytime. So from my experience, it very much, and it's a very good question. It very much depends on who the operator is. So for some operators, the services which they were offering, they saw it very much as a corporate social responsibility project. So there wasn't really the emphasis on its self-sustainability. So for them, it's just even the idea of thinking of it in this respect as a business unit is something which has been quite alien to them. So for those companies, then it's almost a shift in thinking, and our idea is that once you shift that thinking, then it really focuses on minds on how can this have the biggest impact in a more cost efficient manner rather than just writing checks. Then I would say you do have some companies who are very, let me say, advanced with their use of data, who they can probably already produce this, and maybe for them the value add isn't so high. I don't think I've experienced one, but I could definitely envisage that this has happened in the past, and there will be companies who this maybe has less of a benefit to. But then there's other companies. So a recent example, a company in Tanzania, which the standard of their data, it wasn't very good, but also just they had not approached the services they were delivering with this type of rigor. So they had they were just operating on the basis of experience. So what they had did at the start is they started offering inputs on credit and trainings, but they haven't even really looked at what the costs were of that and what the benefits was. So it's very much that they hadn't looked at it in this way with this level of detail into what are the potential benefits and what are the drawbacks. Anything to add, Heidi?
Yeah, so I think thanks a lot for the question, and I think it really depends on the type of service delivery model, because you have some service delivery models where the case owner is maybe a brand, a global brand, or a global trader. And they are often not doing the actual services themselves, but they engage with input providers, they engage with training providers, with financial institutions, and often they don't actually know exactly what the business case also for those people in the model is. So they actually don't really know what's the actual cost and what's the margin they're making on these things. So in such a case where you look at a wider range of the value chain, you actually see that this approach is has quite a high value add for a company that's further up in the stream, let's say it that way. Because basically then what we also then do is really looking into, what are actually these costs. Sometimes we need to talk to the supplying companies of those services to get that information. But I think generally what we see is the more local you get, the less data is available, and often then going through the data collection with a company, you involve different departments, different people in the organization, and doing the study is really also just a means of getting different parts in a company to talk to each other.
Thank you. Excellent.
I see another hand raised by Tin.
Yep. May I have a question? So I'm thinking work in aquaculture in Vietnam, and we're going to we plan to conduct the SDM with one big company with the shrimp. So my question is, so in the shrimp supply chain or value chains, so they have like several kind of the farming practice, such as extensive, shrimp extensive or intensive, and farming practice. So they have different like supply chain, and if we conduct the SDM, so with so we I mean in the scope we will cope with all kind of the service delivery shrimp practice model within the company, or we separately it like extensive separately with the intensive.
Yeah, so maybe let me answer this. Thanks a lot for your question. Before we start a study, what we first do is really a scoping, understanding what is in scope and what is out scope for the purpose of a study. If I understand it correctly, then this would probably be a case for segmentation and understanding better which are the farmers, or in that case, in the aquaculture sector, what is the type of farming practices that could be more an extensive practice versus what is the type of farmers that are more intensive practice. And you could see whether you can actually segment then the model and see whether different services apply. But this is then really something, I think, when we start the study, this is really something that in the initial discussions, we really need to discuss this with the team that is doing the study to scope this well and develop an approach that fits
but we
the
can
context.
do both. For example, but we can do both, like or several kind of the supply chain in at the same time. It had to be separately.
So I cannot give you a final answer to this because I don't know the full context of the study. But usually we look at different segments, and it does not sound like out of the normal to me what you mentioned.
Yeah. And my second question is, what is the starting point where to engage the companies to join with the SDM? Because, for example, like in my case, when they ask, so I just know overall the SDM. So how can I?
Yeah. So we at the end of this webinar, we will talk a little bit more about how you can actually then start an SDM study with your program and what are the next steps to take. So we'll talk about this in a moment.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, if there's no further questions, then I suggest we move on. Okay, great. Kap?
Yep, next slide, please. Okay, so what Heidi said before the questions is relates to this slide here about the sensitivities, and once we get beyond looking at the basic information at the farm level and the SDM level, is we want to see what is the impact of changing certain variables on our outcomes. So at the farm level, often what we do is we might run a sensitivity analysis on productivity and farm gate price, because one of the weaknesses of using Excel models for a lot of forward-looking projections is you're heavily reliant on the quality of your assumptions, and this is something which we acknowledge is a challenge, and it's not something that we can necessarily overcome. So when we're building the initial assumptions for prices and for product and productivity, we often speak to agronomists, we look at external literature sources, but then there's still a level of judgment calls which are made in understanding what might be the impact of this additional service. So what might be the impact of irrigation on productivity? And because of that, and because of the impact which these assumptions have on the outcomes that we see in our analysis, is we find it important that, and we think it's necessary to run sensitivity analysis on these. So on the left-hand side, you can see the example there, which looks at what would happen to the farmer's net income in US dollars per hectare as the price increases or decreases, and as productivity increases or decreases. Similarly, on the right-hand side, you can see an example of a sensitivity analysis we might run at an SDM operator level. So here, to provide a bit of context to this SDM operator, so here there is a buyer who is sourcing sunflower seeds, and the oil content of sunflower seeds has quite a significant impact on commercial margins. So what we wanted to look at here is we wanted to test the assumption of the average oil content that they were sourcing and how this would impact their operating margin. So this allows the client themselves to see, okay, if oil content is going to have such a big impact on our operating margin, what do we need to do to ensure that the seeds that we source have higher oil content? So in this instance, it might be we need to ensure that all our farmers can afford seeds. Do we give them seeds for free? You might also talk about what extension services you are offering to farmers. So when we look at the sensitivities and we look at the individual variables, the key variables which are important, which we find are fundamental to the model, this is where we really, I think, where the value add of our analysis comes in, because a lot of these companies might have a good broad idea of their P&L, but they might not have focused on what changes in what circumstance. Next slide, please. Okay. So a more recent addition or an ongoing addition to the typical SDM case study. So anyone who's looked at an old case study probably wouldn't have seen this, but it's something which we are bringing in now, is to better align the SDM analysis with the technical assistance opportunities that we can perhaps fund or we can advise on. So these examples here are from a case which is currently being done. But what we have at the end of the report, so we try to identify what are the weaknesses, the weaknesses and perhaps also the threats to this SDM, and what opportunities exist to overcome these weaknesses. So, for example, I'll take the second opportunity pathway which we identified here, is this this buyer had a really disorganized way of handling data, and it was dealing with farmers who were organized in farmer organizations, and it wanted to build its SDM or design its SDM in a way where it could incentivize or it could reward farmers individually for their performance in terms of the quality and the quantity of produce, but also at the farmer organization level. So in principle, this seemed like a good idea, but one of the things which we identified is that they don't have the capability to monitor performance. So what we do here is we then would we give them recommendations, and we don't want to push them in the way of specific service providers, but we try to give them an understanding of what type of features would a farm management system have, which would allow them to take advantage of the opportunity. Okay, next slide. Yep. Okay, so managing expectations. So this is a key slide, and it's often a key area of confusion, both internally and externally, is what can companies expect from the SDM study. So we say an SDM study, it's a business planning tool. It's a way to discover improvement or innovation areas. It's a benchmarking tool, and it's a high-level strategic evaluation of an SDM. What it isn't, and we don't pretend to be, an official impact assessment tool. It's not a way of approving or certifying a service delivery model. It's not an audit, and it's not a detailed financial planning tool. The deliverables which we have, so for each case study, we have a private case report which ranges between, I guess, 45 and 70 slides long. And this private case report goes to the SDM operator and IDH only. Then we have public versions of the report, and the key reason why we have differences between these reports is a lot of clients you will find don't want all their sensitive commercial information in the public domain. So we also produce public case reports which we've stripped out a lot of the numbers. You might see trends, but we agree with the client on what can be put into the public domain. And then we give them what we call the SDM tool. So in this webinar, we don't talk much about the SDM tool. In the 2-day training we offer, we talk a lot more about the tool, but the tool is effectively the Excel model where we perform all our analysis. Okay, so I can see a question from Gillian. When looking at opportunities for investment, are we also identifying whether TA or the fund is better suited for financing it? Heidi, would you like to take the question?
Yeah, so thanks, Gillian, for your question. Yeah, this is something that we're working out at the moment. So we're working out an approach how we can better kind of do a investment readiness analysis as part of the SDM studies. For SDM studies that we have, that it was very clear that the potential next step is a finance deal. We have already done that in the past, but we're currently working together with the fund on better identifying a way how, as part of our methodology, we can make this link clearer. But it's work in progress. So thanks, Kaf. Should we continue with the next slide? So looking at time.
Yes, please. Okay. So what is in the scope of a standard SDM? So traditionally in scope, we'll always look at the service delivery to smallholder farmers, sourcing from smallholder farmers, we might look at the business case for cooperatives or other intermediaries, where there's models where you have collectors, middlemen, we might look at those. And then we can also look at across various crops. So some SDMs have up to 5 crops under analysis. And again, the scope of an SDM is one of the challenges, is because if you have an unlimited scope, then you need more resources. And we try to define the scope, but there is a good deal of flexibility at what can be taken into account. Out of scope, so processing and packing operations are actually more and more being brought into scope to provide better analysis on the commercial side. But it's not something which we promise as part of the standard SDM analysis. Neither do we offer market or demand analysis or financial statements. Okay. Next slide. Okay. So some more practicalities. So an SDM study takes between 8 and 16 weeks. And this depends largely if primary data collection is included. It can be a shorter time frame when we have a really responsive SDM operator who provides us lots of data up front, but that is not always the experience. So it can also take longer. In the middle of this an analytical period, is there's a country visit where we spend 4 to 5 days in country. And what this country visit normally entails is meetings with management, firstly to really understand the model, but then several days of data collection on both the SDMs details and farmer details. There's normally a farm visit to validate the information that we've collected either through primary data collection or via an agronomist. And then we normally have a wrap-up session where we present some preliminary analysis of the study. In terms of planning, an SDM study needs to be requested 2 to 3 months in advance. From a cost perspective, the total cost of each SDM study is around 40,000 euros, and we ask for a private contribution of 15,000. And then the last point here is on data privacy. So again, we understand that data privacy is a key issue for our clients. So all the analysis is executed under a cooperation agreement, which includes a non-disclosure agreement to ensure confidentiality. And what we haven't mentioned yet, but Heidi will mention in the next part of this webinar, is that we collect all this data from the different SDMs, and they go into a database where we can do aggregate analysis at the aggregate level. But at this stage, it's anonymized, so anyone external won't be able to find the data of individual SDMs. Okay, next slide. Okay, I just see a question. So crop insurance sounds like a brilliant idea for smallholder farmers, but the reality is that in Ghana, and I think it's an issue across sub-Saharan Africa, the insurance companies do not have products for crop insurance. Is there any other alternative? So this question, I can only answer from what I've seen. But I've seen there's a handful of companies which are emerging, at least in East Africa. So Acre Africa, both in Tanzania and Kenya, and I believe other countries, and Pula, who are now developing more and more insurance products for farmers. In terms of alternatives, I don't think I'm best positioned to answer that other than from what I've seen. Heidi, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, so generally, we don't have yet a selection of best practices in terms of crop insurances. I think that's something interesting to look at for the future. Normally, what we do with a study, we like to understand whether there are risks and opportunities related to climate resilience. So crop insurance is something that can fall under income diversification, but also climate resilience. So if we would do a case study in Ghana and we realize that this is that crop loss is a huge risk for farmers, then in this individual case, we would look whether there is a service provider available to fit into this gap. But we cannot really make a general answer to this.
Thank you. Okay, so just the last slide for me is just to talk about the SDM methodology as a whole. It's very much an evolving approach. So we continuously look at what are the weaknesses of our approach and how can we continue to improve it. So what I have here are just 3 highlights of ongoing work. So firstly, so Heidi's been doing a lot of work on this primary data collection at the farm level, and that started in August 2019. And that's to really strengthen the credibility of our farm level analysis, because historically the data we've collected at the farm level has either come from a farm management system which the company has, or it's come from a agronomist, a company agronomist, or external literature. So building in primary data collection, which we hope will be implemented across all SDMs in the future, really reinforces the quality of our data and the assumptions we use when we're talking about what the impact or what are the effects at the farm level. As I mentioned earlier, there's work going on with regards to mainstreaming gender, as well as our other lenses of climate resilience and food security and nutrition into the SDM approach. So at the moment, there's dedicated parts of a case report to these lenses, but we're working more and more to really make these things present throughout all our work. And then finally, the indicators. So at the moment, we collect 277 there's 277 indicators which we collect from each and every case which we do. So that's a lot of indicators, and there's a lot more data points because some of them are across various years. But what we aim to do and what we are doing is we revise these indicators to adjust to what we think what are the most effective, but also what's happening in the sector. So what are the data points which impact investors might be looking at? What are the data points which policy think tanks are looking at? So it's always an evolving methodology. And if there are no more questions, I'm going to switch this back to Heidi.
Wait, I'm seeing another answer on the crop insurance. Okay, so I am gonna move to the next section of this webinar. So in this section, we're gonna talk about really how does this relate to your program, and we mainly focus really on what is actually our strategy as FarmFit, and to a large extent also on as IDH. And then the last section, we really look into the specifics. So how can we work together? So how can you work with FarmFit? What is the type of services that you can have from us? But also how can you really start an SDM study? So the following slides are really part of our usual pitch to companies. So if there's any questions, yeah, please raise the hand or put them in the chat. So as FarmFit, overall, what we like to see is that the companies benefit from a professional and long-term supply with farmers, and we say really in this we don't call them in that sense beneficiaries anymore, but we really see it as a shift in mindset from the side of companies, that they see the service delivery to farmers as a business, and they see them as clients. And on the other hand, we also really envision that farmers get access to the right service to grow their business. So this is ultimately where we want to get to as IDH with this methodology, and this is what we're doing under FarmFit. So our offer is basically that doing an SDM study, we can provide you with data-driven insights, and you in this case is you, but also your partner and the company, to ensure that you can that the company can ensure a secure quality supply, but also that the services are provided in an efficient and effective way, and that companies can scale their business and impact. What we see a lot is that companies come to us and say they have maybe 1,000 farmers that they're currently servicing, and they like to increase this over the next 5 to 10 years by five times, 10 times. So this SDM methodology is really also a tool to think through with the companies what are the implications of scaling a business, and what needs to be taken into account. So our value proposition as FarmFit Business Support is basically that we improve the farmer engagement model, the sourcing model of a company. We identify weaknesses and opportunities based on what we analyze in the analysis. We link companies to different partners to see how other organizations could support this service delivery model. We co-fund business innovations, so based on results that we receive from a study, we dig into these opportunity pathways and see how can we support the business in scaling a sustainable and efficient and effective service delivery model. And we also matchmake companies to meet their financial needs to further scale up by connecting them to financial institutions and banks or our own FarmFit fund. We will talk a little bit more about co-funding ratios within FarmFit in a moment, but that's generally around 30 to 50%. So for us, innovation is key. So why should companies actually innovate in their smallholder business model? And we see there's 3 main reasons. So first of all, they want to improve the sourcing model. They want to improve organizational capacities, or we're financing the growth. So it's really, when it's about the sourcing model, it's really about better understanding who's the farmer, understanding really what's the client, and also seeing maybe some of the services need to be tailored differently for some farmers than others. We work with companies on looking into new or improved services. We work with companies on introducing new technologies, such like farmer management systems. We look into revenue streams and better understanding how can you make a service delivery model long-term more sustainable. But we're also working with companies on exploring new markets, on replicating existing approaches in different areas. On the next point, we are looking into, one second, let me mute. So on the next bucket, we're looking into supporting companies in building their organizational capacity. So that can be building the capacity of the staff to better deliver services, but it's also working out with the company to see how service delivery can be part of the core business, and exploring how interventions related to our lenses can be incorporated into their core business approach and service delivery. And lastly, we work with companies that have high growth ambitions on. So let me mute again. So we're working with companies to finance their growth. So we help them to identify really what are the investment needs and opportunities. We are supporting them in building an investment business plan, and we also matchmake them with financiers. We do this for our own fund, but we also do this for other funds. So we are not bound to our own fund. But for example, we're also working with a tough fund, with a L&D fund together, and see how the SDM approach can work in this way. So basically, then the next steps for a company would be to link an SDM really with an IDH financed TA project. So once we have completed a study, it's really about, okay, how do we move forward? So what is it what we can do, and what is it what we cannot do? So if a company wants to introduce a new service, we can support them in financing a market assessment or feasibility study. We can support them in providing advice on how to develop and introduce those new services. And if technology can be a leverage point here, but we also can help them to hire new staff to introduce these new services. In a case where a company wants to integrate gender as part of their business, we can help them to do an in-depth assessment of the gender and risk and opportunities. We provide advice on how to develop gender-smart interventions, but also we can train their staff on this. Things that we cannot finance as TA projects is recurring costs to operate a service delivery model that need to happen on a continuous basis. We are not financing fixed assets. We cannot finance anything that is not related to smallholder engagements, or, for example, processing activities, and we're not financing any projects that don't have a business case, which are just looking at a kind of corporate social responsibility project. Are there any questions at this point? Okay, so then I think a key question is, of course, also how do we actually measure this? So what is our approach in terms of tracking whether there is some progress? Like I've said earlier, we're currently working on a primary data collection approach, and we basically say there's three key elements to our M&E system, to the way how we measure things. With an SDM study, we take it really as a baseline. We really understand how the business case looks like, how the SDM works. We gather a lot of data on a company. Then on some key KPIs, when we start a TA project, we asked companies to, what happens there? We ask companies to report on them annually, and after 2-3 years at the end of a study, we also ask companies to do another SDM study, where we basically go back to what we have started at the beginning and reassess how things have been going. For us, key KPIs is the increase in farmer net income related to the new and improved services. It's the increase in numbers that can access financial services, but it's also the total smallholder farmers that are served by FarmFit. We're having a whole total goal of reaching 1.5 million farmers, of which half of them should be women. So, and this M&E system is still evolving, but this is also then something that for you as a program could fit in there. So if you want to do an SDM study at the start of a program, please also consider to do it at the end, so you can actually see what has happened in between. So now, I said in the beginning, this presentation is not focusing on the fund, but we do work very closely together. So we like to mention a little bit about it. Basically, what we do with an SDM study, we identify the investment needs and opportunities. And ultimately, we want to see that using the rich information that we gain from the SDM study, we can build an investable business plan together with the company. And with this business plan, we go and knock at the door of different financial organizations to really see whether there's a match. And then the fund comes in to really support the company in scaling and growing And this can be something like working capital loans, but it can also be capital expenditure investments or assets. It can be equity. And I think the fund is now in the process of being officially launched, and I think we will get some more information about how this works as well. But I think it's good to know that we do the SDM approach is really connected to what the fund is doing. Okay, I'm going to move now to the next section. If there's no more questions. So this section is really about, okay, how can you work together with FarmFit? And let me, sorry. So basically, like I said earlier, FarmFit has 3 elements. And now we're going to really focus, first of all, about FarmFit business support. And to just restate this again, so FarmFit business support is really where our execution team is there. So this is our colleagues who are doing SDM studies. This is our colleagues who are working closely with companies on business development, and this is also the unit where we are doing the TA projects and provide advisory and support. So when we look at how we can work together, or how you as a program can work together with us, there's a couple of elements to this. So first of all, we can do an SDM study for you. And as part of this SDM study, we can help you to identify really clear pathways of potential TA projects and understanding really what's effective, efficient, and then sustainable in the long run. Under FarmFit, in this period, we're doing 60 SDM studies, and we'll talk a bit more about selection criteria on those in a moment. But I think what is important to mention is that these 60 SDM studies don't need to be fully financed only by FarmFit. Actually, we are already seeing that we're, for example, working very closely together with a coffee team on some cases where we look into not only models that focus on coffee, but we're looking into models that focusing on diversification elements on cash crops. But beyond these 60 SDM analysis, we also can do cases for your programs outside Africa or that are not focusing on our key cash crops. A second element that we can focus on is that we can work with you to co-finance for innovation. So under FarmFit, under this project, we will do around 40 TA projects in these 5 years. And also here, it's good to mention this. Don't need to be only projects that are solely financed by FarmFit, but these can also be projects that we can do together with the different business units. And this is really the follow-up of a study. We cannot finance anything if we don't have a standard study before. And lastly, we can work together to matchmake companies that have a high finance needs with financial institutions and funds. And under FarmFit, we committed to do at least 12 deals over the period of 5 times. And this is also where we will closely work together with our fund. Just a bit of small print here. Like I said earlier, with this donor agreement, we are only focusing on sub-Saharan Africa. So, and 70% of all our cases will be focusing on food crops, on staples. So whenever and this is really purely about finance, so whenever we as FarmFit co-finance something on cash crops, this needs to be a very innovative model. So like I said, it needs to be either something where you have a very innovative approach on how to include gender or climate, or it can also be financial inclusion. It can be food security and nutrition, where you look at crop diversification. And we will speak about those selection criteria a little bit more in detail. Let me pause here for a moment. Yes, if you like to, Kaf, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think we have a question on the line.
Yes. Go ahead, Jan.
About the, it's about the costs or how to engage with non-Sub-Saharan Africa, right? So our programs are often into Asia and other countries. How does it, how much, you said 40,000 and then 15,000 would be funded by the company and the rest would be funded by the FarmFit. That's only for the African, right? So the others have to pay the full money or the programs have to chip in? What is the guidance there? Because it is, in practice, it is often very difficult to convince a company to pay 40,000 for a study before they even start doing anything in the field. So this has been a limiting factor for a lot of SDMs on our end. So what are the options there outside of that?
Yeah, so just for clarification, I will go back to that slide also later. The cost is around 40,000 and we always ask 15,000 from a company. We've standardized this to make this also just simpler on the administrative part. So we always ask 15,000 private contribution for cases. There's some exceptions where this can also be financed by the IDH program team. And there's also some exceptions where we see that SDM studies are part of a wider TA agreement and already contracted as such. And in such cases, we always add a clause that the whole TA project approach can change based on findings in the study. So to summarize, basically, we always ask companies to provide 15K. There is some exceptions, and I think Kaf, we actually have a slide on this.
But who the rest in the case of non-African countries?
The program.
The program. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
The program. Are there any more questions on this? Okay. Then I will continue. So this was really about the business support. We also have the Intelligence Center. As you have noticed, both me and Kaf are actually working for the FarmFit Intelligence Center. And we're doing a lot of different things. But we're basically really, I would say, the keepers of the methodology, ensuring that this works. But we also have a couple of other things that we're bigger work streams that we're working on. And so the first one is actually that we create insights. So we, while the business support team produces the individual case reports, what we do is we take out the key indicators and we provide aggregate insights. We are interested in understanding better what are the bigger trends of when we look at various SDM studies. We then share those insights in webinars. This is an internal webinar, but we're also having an external webinar planned in October on best practices around financial service provision. We are going to publish our insights report for this year at the end of this year, where we basically look into what are the trends when looking at all the SDM studies that we have conducted so far. So this is really where we gather all the knowledge that we have on these individual SDM studies and push it out to the wider sector. The second part is that we bring together key partners on topics like technology or gender. As part of our insights report, we also have a learning event where we ask all the companies that we've worked in to come and other relevant people, where we really talk about key themes and topics that we're seeing in the field. What we're also doing, we're doing benchmarking. So we compare all the cases with each other on key variables with the models. And lastly, we also are providing tools. So the analytical tool, and really, if you want to know much more about it, please join the SDM training in October. This will be something that we are also planning to have online, so people can work on this. So we're really the knowledge hub, so to say, of what FarmFit is doing. And it is very, very similar to the work that the learning and innovation team is doing on an IDH-wide perspective. So how you can work with us is that if you have questions, if you want to understand better best practices, if you want to also see more on a strategic level, maybe you have done several cases already where you've done an SDM study and you want to understand how do they relate to each other, what are the wider trends. These are things when you can reach out to us, where we can provide you with some more input and information. And yeah, like I said, so end of October, there will be a webinar that is for everyone, open for everyone, where we actually talk about what are best practice on financial service provision when working with smallholders. And we have a couple of organizations on working this. And there will also be our learning event for our partners in November. I see a question coming from Carla.
Hi, hello Heidi. 3 questions. One is on the events, the dates, just to make sure it doesn't overlap with other events that IDH is organizing on living income. We also have a webinar end of October and a conference in November. So just to make sure we're aligned and we don't overwhelm our partners with events. And the other is on, we are starting to receive more and more ask from the SDM people to include more living income lenses into your analysis. And so who do we need to talk about how to move this forward? Is this you, Bern, Heidi, or I know Oscar has also reached us and other people from the team. So good to start aligning on that.
And your third question?
Yeah, it was the conference and the webinar together.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so so on dates, our learning event is on the 18th and 19th of November in Nairobi. You can reach out to me later about more details about it. It will not be a very big event, around 150 people. So let's align indeed on the partners that we're reaching out to. And it would be also good to understand when your event is. On the webinar, we're looking at the last week of October, dates to be confirmed. And on your question regarding how, if you have an approach that you like to incorporate into the methodology, I think a good starting point is to reach out to Bernd Isenberg, who is the manager of the Intelligence Center. You can always CC me or Kaf in this. And then we can have a conversation on how to best approach this, and whether to what extent and what elements we can incorporate this into the methodology. Did this answer your question?
Yeah, thanks. And just to clarify, 22nd of October we have a webinar on living wage. And in November 5th and 6th of
I think I lost
November, there is.
Sorry. I think I lost you. I'm not sure if it's my connection, but so you said 5th and 6th is your event?
5th and 6th of November, there is a big conference, not IDH conference, but organized by the Dutch government, the German government, and several certifications, fair trade, rainforest, IDH, to tackle living wage and living income issues together. So it's a big thingy. Probably your partners are aware of it, hopefully. And IDH is organizing several of the sessions and organizing the whole event also. And then the webinar, it is on the 22nd of October. We will send it in the newsletter at the end of this month. And everyone is also welcome from your partners.
Okay, perfect, great. Thanks. Okay, if there's no further questions, with only a few slides left, then I would move on. Okay. So, to recap some of the practicalities, like I said, or like Kaf said actually, a normal study takes around 8 to 16 weeks. which requires a high responsiveness actually from the SDM operator and the program team. And this is just considering a standard scope. We would go 4 to 5 days in country. We highly recommend if you're a program team and you want to do an SDM study, do come with us into this country visit. It is extremely interesting and crucial to understand the discussions that are taking place during this country visit. And if you want to do an SDM study, you should plan this at least 2 to 3 months in advance. So if you like to do an SDM study, let's say in January, now is a really good moment to reach out. And like said earlier, so the total cost of 40,000 K, the private contribution is 15, and the difference is paid by IDH, which is if it's financed by FarmFit, we do it. If it's financed by the program pays this, and if it's a joint case, we share this. On data privacy, the analysis, we have a cooperation agreement with a strict NDA and our own terms and conditions, and we also use this data on an anonymized basis to build a cross-sector database. So how can you actually request an SDM study? So we have an approach that goes in different steps. Oh, I see another question for Jan.
Well, maybe you will answer it right away, but is there anything you have ready, a kind of package for reach out to partners to inform them in a very brief way what you can do for them?
Sorry, I lost you. Can you repeat your question?
Yeah, just wondering whether there is a kind of a information package we can share with partners to start conversations on the SDM.
Yeah, so we're working on it. Let's say it that way. The best way, and I will show you, but the best way is to organize an engagement call. But let me walk through this process, and that becomes a bit clearer. So what we do is we talk about 2 different stages when we want to understand what you're up to. We talk about an opportunity stage and an SDM request stage. So if you see an opportunity, like for example, a conversation that you're having with a partner on a potential SDM, or maybe you have met someone at a conference who's interested in this, or there have been some conversations on which are very not non-specific yet. You haven't talked about dates, you haven't talked about the specifics of the study, about prices. Then we ask you to lock it as an opportunity, because then we know this is ongoing and we can also ensure to really support you in this process. You can use it using this form. I will share the presentation later where you can do this. When you have done this, what we actually will do is we will assign an account manager. So this will be someone from our business support team that really can help you to properly convey what FarmFit is about and what the SDM work is about. Once you have done actually the SDM training, this will be something that you could do yourself. But basically, if, for example, and if you have a case that comes up, you can lock it as an opportunity, and then someone from our team will reach out to you and say, okay, let me support you in the pitching, let me support you with all the information that you need to ensure that this will be a good case. And also, they will do some first scoping and understanding, is the SDM approach actually a right approach for what you need at this time? Once this is done, and we see, well, this is a good fit, the SDM study works, this is we see a great opportunity, the account manager from FarmFit would request this for the approval by our management team. We are currently having a lot more demand for SDM studies than we can cater to, so we also have to make decisions on what to prioritize. I have another slide on those prioritization in a moment. But basically, we run this through an approval process by our FarmFit management team, which consists of several people, including Tony, Rose, who else there? Iris van der Velde, Simon, there's a couple, Keba, and Roel. These are a couple of people who are also part, who are directors, global directors, that make those approvals. And only then, when this is approved, we start the admin and the planning. We sign contracts, we confirm timelines, and we give you a team to do this, and we start with the kickoff of this study. So if there's no further questions, I will talk a little bit more about the selection criteria. So we've talked about it before. We have quite high selection criteria for better understanding whether the SDM approach is actually a good approach and whether also the company is ready for it. So the first thing that we look at is the vision of a company. So does a company really sees this as an opportunity, that service delivery can be seen as a business? Are they really interested in looking at the business case? Or is this really just for them a corporate social responsibility approach, and they are not so interested in whether this can be long-term sustainable from a financial point of view? We're looking also into local food impact. So does the main activity of a company have an impact on regional food trade? So this is especially a farm fit criteria. Like I said, we're focusing 70% on staple crops. So we're looking at beans, maize, cassava, all these things. So for us, it's really important that companies also have an impact on local food trade. We're looking into innovation. So we're looking into whether the model the company is looking at or would like to do is innovative, is cutting edge, or is it just business as usual? We're looking at the scale of the farmers. Like I said, we are targeting to reach 1.5 million farmers. This is quite a high number, so we also need to make strategic decisions on the scale of the companies that we're working with to reach this impact. And ultimately, we also look into whether whether an SDM approach also includes gender, climate resilience, food security, and nutrition. And I really like to emphasize again, these are really our farm fit criteria. So if you as a program want to request an SDM study, it will always be a bit of a conversation. So especially when you're doing a case in a typical cash crop, then of course, then local food impact may not be really big, but maybe it's a very innovative program. So there's always some discussions point. These are not black and white. And to provide a little bit more guidance on this, I'm going to move to the next slide, and then I have some more time for questions. It's basically the management team has kind of 3 steps of making decisions. First of all, we look into whether this fits within the farm fit targets. So we are committed to do 60 SDM studies in sub-Saharan Africa, leading to 40 technical assistance projects, which at least 20 should go into a finance contract. So that means that automatically we already are more interested in TA projects that potentially have a high degree of investability. But it also means, and for all these, we would pay 50% of the costs. So if you as a program fit into this category, if we can do something together, we as FarmFit are willing or are able to co-fund this by 50%. The second criteria is when this is a pure case, which is with commodity or landscapes program. So if you fall within the first criteria, so in the selection criteria that we have, so you have an innovative program project, you have strong focus on any social and environmental criteria, you're having a company that's committed to see service delivery as a business, then we can work together to have this funded as FarmFit business support and share the costs. If this is outside the criteria, this needs to be funded by the program or the commodity program. And a third option is also that actually SDMs can be financed fully by a third party. So what we had before, we have been before FarmFit was there, the Gates Foundation actually wanted us to assess one of their 10 of their grantees, and we had a project with them over these 10 cases. So it may also be another situation is that we're now working with a rural agricultural finance learning lab from the MasterCard Foundation, which is basically focusing on financial service delivery to smallholder farmers. And there we also have a longer and more strategic relationship where they finance around 10 cases with financial service providers. So basically, like I said, we have much more demand for cases than we actually can cater for right now. So this is the decision tree basically that the management team will use. And yes, like I will also say in the last slide, there's also opportunities for SDM staff for other IDH staff to become an SDM staff and be fully trained. But more on this. Are there any questions on the selection criteria? Okay, then I will move on. So lastly, the SDM process. So how does this really look like? And you see these little arrows that they could stand for weeks. So you really start with a very broad discussions, initial engagements, expression of interest. This is kind of really the moment where you reach out also to our team and say, I see an opportunity here. And then our team comes in and can support you really in the objective setting, the scope, also the contracting of a planning and the planning of a study. For upcoming cases, and this is not yet standard for all, we're then doing a primary data collection for farmers in the field. So we work together with an M&E company called Aquo. With them, we're developing an approach to actually reach out to farmers with a representative sample to do primary data collection. Once we have that primary data, this will go to our teams, which that prepare the descriptive case. This is really the contextual slides, what CAF has introduced earlier. Then the team goes and does the country or the partner visit, and the quantitative analysis of the model the modeling starts and the final report. And after this, TA discussions start. And to already kind of tell you a bit more, so this is really also where we focus a lot more into the SDM training, which will be taking place in October, where we really look into, okay, so what are these different elements? What are these different steps? What do I learn? And the different elements of the process. What does this entail? What does this entail for the company that we're working with? What is it? What I can learn as a program for it? And also, how is this actually being done? So really understanding how we use this methodology. So if you like to join the training, it's in the week of the 14th of October, and there's different reasons to join. So really, the first reason is just a general interest, and you want to become an SDM advocate. So maybe you see really for your own program that you see a lot of potential SDM studies coming up, and you like to better understand this, and you like to better lead conversations also with the partner organizations on how this could benefit their business, but also how this could work then in terms of linking it to a potential technical assistance program, and you really like to understand more the mechanics as well on the model. And then there's also a reason that you actually may say, well, this is actually really, really interesting. I would love to do this myself. So I would love to do analysis myself. I'd like to understand this. How can we do this for our programs? And you don't only want to read the report, but you actually say, I want to dig into the numbers. Then this training is really the starting point of a learning trajectory. And we also have developed an SDM trainings manual, which I will make available, which we can get if you click on the presentation, where we spell this out a little bit more, how this actually looks like. Currently, we're still working with New Foresight, but from the next year onwards, we're actually doing cases only by ourselves. So yeah, like I said, really, the SDM, this was just for us from our side a quick insight into what we do with the SDM work, and how does FarmFit fit in there, and how this relates to your program. But if you want to go deeper and actually understand how can you use this for your program and how can you best pitch this, we really recommend you to join the training. And if you want to become an SDM analyst or manager, you would join this training, and you would join a case study that takes place the 2 days after the training. So are there any more questions? Or Kaf, do you have any more additions?
Nothing to add from me.
Okay, then I think we are through the slides. So, like I said, we're here for you to answer your questions. We will share the presentation. We will also share the recording. So please feel free to look at it in more detail. Like I said, we will have a new report coming soon. These 3 screenshots are the reports that we have been publishing in the past. You can also find them on the website. Yes, and I'd like to thank everyone for coming. It's great to see so much interest in our work. And I wish you all a good day.
Yeah, Hadrian, just to thank you, because I've seen a couple of these presentations, and honestly, this is the best one I've seen on FarmFit, and it really positions the SDM analysis very well against the intervention itself. And my compliments also to Kaf and yourself. Very good. Thanks a lot for this, and makes it much more clear. And I think people here and around the room have been for almost 2 hours been looking very attentively to your presentation. So very good.
Well, thanks a lot. If you want more of it, join the training, yeah?
Thanks for the feedback.